For centuries, women lived under a sky that never truly belonged to them, a sky that watched silently as their voices were ignored, their choices were limited, and their lives were shaped by rules they never helped create. History was not written for them, it was written about them, and most of the time, even that was erased. This silence was not accidental. It was designed, carefully built through beliefs, traditions, and laws that convinced the world inequality was natural, that obedience was virtue, and that power was something women were never meant to touch. And when a system repeats a lie long enough, it stops sounding like control and starts sounding like culture. So generations grew up believing this was simply how the world worked. Men led, women followed. Men decided, women adapted. Ambition was strength in one gender and danger in the other. Soft pause. Yet beneath this controlled sky, something invisible was forming, not loudly, not violently, but quietly and persistently, because even the most powerful systems cannot fully erase thought. And the moment women began to think independently, to read forbidden words, to question inherited rules, the foundation of inequality began to crack. Because education does not just teach facts, it teaches possibility, and possibility is the enemy of control. As women learned to read and write, they began to see the gap between what they were told and what they were capable of. That realization spread slowly, from homes to classrooms to whispered conversations behind closed doors, not as rebellion at first, but as awareness, the understanding that they were not weak, but restricted, not incapable, but excluded. And awareness is dangerous because it cannot be unseen. Once women understood that their silence was the system's greatest protection, breaking that silence became inevitable, even when the cost was high, even when the punishment was real. The first women who spoke were not celebrated. They were mocked, dismissed, arrested, labeled unstable, unfit, unacceptable. Yet history often begins with voices society is not ready to listen to. As more voices joined, individual courage transformed into collective strength. What began as isolated resistance became organized movements, demanding education, legal identity, voting rights, representation, not as favors, but as fundamental rights. The response was harsh, because power never gives itself away willingly. Protests were suppressed, reputations were destroyed, progress was delayed, but it was never stopped, because truth does not retreat. Once it is spoken, slowly, laws began to change. Voting rights were recognized. Property ownership expanded. Education opened its doors. For the first time, women became legally visible, but visibility did not instantly mean equality, because culture always lags behind legislation. Even after rights were written on paper, real freedom had to be fought for. In workplaces, in homes, in public spaces, where invisible barriers replaced visible ones, where women were allowed to work, but paid less, allowed to lead, but questioned more, allowed to succeed, but punished for failing. Still, progress continued, because going backward was no longer an option. As women entered professions once denied to them, they proved what had always been true. Opportunity reveals ability. In science, politics, education, and business, they reshaped the world in ways history had never prepared for. Then the digital age removed the final layer of silence. Stories could no longer be hidden. Experiences could no longer be isolated. Injustice could no longer pretend to be rare. Voices traveled globally in seconds. Movements formed without permission. Societies were forced to confront truths they had ignored for too long. Young girls grew up seeing representation instead of limitation, possibility instead of restriction, choice instead of obedience, understanding that equality was never about replacing anyone, but about standing equally. Even today, the struggle continues because progress is not permanent. Rights must be protected, challenged, and renewed by every generation, especially in a world where power still resists balance. And this is why this story matters now, more than ever. Because the secret that changed women's rights forever was never violence, never force. It was awareness, the realization that power does not disappear. It only hides where silence allows it to survive. And once silence is broken, history is forced to change, again and again, under the same sky that once watched quietly, but now listens.